Good afternoon, everybody in Asia, and good morning to everybody in Europe, and welcome to our webinar on racing with a machine, proudly presented to you by Logisim Webinars and Automation Anywhere. My name is Joe Lombardo. I am the Logisim editor-in-chief of the Logisim magazine, and my co-host is Dr. Ramon Krishna, who is the president of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society here in Singapore. We are very pleased to have with us two guests today. I'll present Serene Keng, who is the Director of Partner Sales and Channels for Automation Anywhere, and Professor Richard Wilding, OB, Professor of Supply Chain Strategy at Cranfield University. If I may quickly just say a few words about our speakers. Serene has spent more than 18 years working in different technology fields spanning fintech, storage, and cybersecurity. Her current role is a global leader in RPA and basically robotic process automation, and working very closely with businesses to build an ecosystem in the digital workforce movement. Professor Richard Wilding has many accomplishments over his career, and as I said, he is the full professor at the Center for Logistics and Supply Chain Management at Cranfield School of Management in the UK. And he's also the UK chairman of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport UK. The format of our webinar today is to hear a presentation from Serene Keng, after which we'll have a discussion with Professor Wilding, and then we will open discussion to our audience, and where we can ask not only questions about what Automation Anywhere is doing in robotic process automation, but also what's happening in the industry. And Professor Wilding has a very broad experience in this area, and he can give us an insight, not only what's happening in Asia, but also, more importantly, what's happening in Europe and the rest of the world. So let us start off with Serene. Serene, if you'd like to start off with your presentation, and we will then come in and have discussions on that. In the meantime, my co-host, Dr. Ramon Krishna, will also be monitoring various questions from the audience, such that we can try and field all the interest that's coming out from the participation. Right, so Serene, in your hands, please take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Serene. I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Partnership ASEAN in Automation Anywhere, where Automation Anywhere is a leader in the field of intelligent automation. To be honest, when I look at the title Racing with the Machine, my heart palpitates. And because I never felt that this is about racing with the machine. It's actually looking at it from an angle of how do we augment our abilities, our human abilities with machines. In our specific use case, it is the robotics that we have, augmenting human abilities to race against the challenges that's thrown to us by the pandemic. So that's how I really view things, although the title is called Racing with the Machines. So hopefully, I think that this title doesn't scare everybody off. It certainly doesn't scare me off, and I'm very happy to use the next 40 minutes or so to have a brief outline on what it takes to, complement the digital workforce with the human workforce in supply chain. So let's move on to the presentation proper. Okay, so as we scroll through this slide, you will see that there are many business reports on surviving supply chain shocks, and COVID-19 accelerate shifts and all these kind of things. In summation, I think what can be seen from this is that there are points of failures. There are areas where more resiliency can or should be built into supply chains, processes, workflows in any industry, especially here, that is now being brought to light because of the pandemic. Okay, so US-China trade tensions, supply chain disruptions, all this have brought to fore, some of these weaknesses inherent in the system. So as a result of that, what you see is that close to 50% of supply chain companies plan to accelerate the speed of automation. They are starting to see that with breakages, with lapses in the flows, it is becoming important to build resiliency into the system as compared to a lesser number, which is 36% previously. So close to 40% is also planning to undergo digital transformation, which is the overarching name for, as part of the automation is of, compared to about 30%, 31% globally previously, right? So in short, there is an acceleration and there's a crystallization of the urgency of needing to look at what parts of supply chain can and should be automated versus the portions that can and must be still taken on by a human to make decisions, okay? I think that at this point, what I would like to say is that usually when I give a presentation, I'm typically the most unpopular person in the room for the first 5 minutes because everybody's thinking, is this person going to make me lose my job? Now, the elephant in the room is that there will be certain job scope that can and will be automated and should be automated. But it also brings to light key aspects where you need human discretion, empathy, and thought process, which can and should be there and should not be taken over by automation. So it starts to bring parity to both sides of the fence. Next. So in today's challenges in the supply chain, you can see that there's new imperative in areas of demand variability, labor shortage. For example, just giving you an example, in purchase order management in supply chain typically requires a very thorough kind of review, but to have to manually review every single order, especially these times when there's spikes, there's bullwhip effects, it is actually very labor intensive. It is error prone and it can cause tremendous process bottlenecks. Now with robotic process automation, purchase orders now can be processed through automated criteria. Now such as pricing, parameters based on quantity and regularity of purchase. Now when an approver matches optimization criteria, it gets sent through to the processing with notifications. Now, if it doesn't, it can get sent through to a human decision maker for them to review and to decide and to come up with a formal decision whether to proceed or not to proceed. So with robotic process automation, only non-conforming orders will need to be reviewed, as opposed to a whole load of orders, whether they already have like processes in places and you still need to have a human to review this. So you can see that with this, it actually helps to push more processes, more standardization, more processes into a standardized format, as opposed to having a huge chunk done by a human, right? So in areas of labor shortage, in areas of freight connectivities, inventory proliferation, shortages in supplies, new regulations, requirements. Now, all these things are what we see that's happening in today's supply chain. So in areas where, these things happen, what do you get? You get people calling for refunds and rebates and all these kind of things here first. Now, if it falls within a parameterized area, you can actually use RPA to send out notifications, give that visibility to your end users and improving the customer experience, rather than waiting for somebody to come to work, open it, think about the things, and actually apply and execute a decision that has already been, standardized in a format by itself, thereby saving time and giving a better user experience. Next. So one of the things about, when humans and digital workers work side by side, something really interesting happened. Now, again, back to the topic about racing with the machine. When you race with a machine, it is a zero-sum game. It sounds like a zero-sum game. But here on the left, you see that there's customer engagement, there's opportunity identification, there's decision-making, versus the three processes on the right, which is process automation, error elimination, and 24/7/365 operations. Now, the activities on the left, you can see that they are higher level activities, things that actually, when a human grok data, or when they think about things and when they apply common sense, which is not that common nowadays, into things, there are discretionary outputs from that. Okay, that's what makes business turn. Now, on the right, when you look at process automation, error elimination, 24/7, 365, these are all, process driven. It is something that has been done, thought of, fixed, process, enshrined, and it just needs execution, right? So as much as we can, as we find the right processes to move to the right side, we allow more time, we bring time, we give time back to the humans on the left to engage and to do what a human does better than a digital worker. Next. All right. So once you see this, right, at automation, what we believe to be an digital enterprise, you need a digitized process and a digital workforce that complements your human workforce. So here, I just want to emphasize that complement is a really important word, because despite concerns that AI, automation, RPA taking jobs away, we believe very strongly that digital workers should complement the strengths of people. And digital workers actually transcend robotic process automation. What do I mean by that? The core attributes about bots is that they are intelligent, using AI to learn and improve over time. They use analytics to ensure that their work is effective, and they are capable of discovering processes that can benefit from their help. So this is that digital worker portion. Now for humans, people's core attributes, they feature empathy, creativity, joining the dots when there are no links in the first place, coming to conclusions, doing something better than what is already there, building relationships and compassion for others. So these are two sets of complementary attributes that does not need to, come into conflict with each other. Rather, you look at it as a complementary. So for people, this manifests in driving strong customer relations, identifying opportunities, whether that be a new sales opportunity, whether that be a new business model that you're building up from ground. We also strive at problem solving, which is one of our best skills, arguably, right? So for digital workers, that's not really the case. Their skills are suited to tackling high volume, low value, repetition, or mundane tasks. So what you get at the end of the day is fast ROI and business values, as you can see. Right, next. Now, just going a little bit into the RPA journey itself, I think that I wouldn't go through in too much details for this, but one of the important things just to remember is that this is a journey. It is not a typical backroom IT project that you start and you use and you leave it in the back room. So in Automation Anywhere, what we typically prescribe is, we go back. Is that we start with something small, we scale fast, and then once you get that buy-in from various stakeholders, you transform and you institutionalize, you get into a jogging pace, right? Next. So some of the things that you look at, the steps to success. Now this is a little bit of an art here first, because what you do not automate is just as important as what you choose to automate. So you select the right processes to automate. Does this process have a happy path? Will this give you the ROI? How many people does it impact? How much savings does it bring you? If you have 10 people doing the job and now you don't have errors caused by human errors, how much money might that save you? So all these things will go towards building a solid business case. Important thing is you need to have a champion from senior management in IT who truly believes that this is something that will be good and is essential to change the organization. Now, at the same time, it is also important to get ground up support, okay? And make sure that you get early, quick success by limiting the initial scopes of deployments before you scale and expand, all right? So next. So as a result, you see that the RPA between 4 to 6 months is the highest percentage where customers have seen results that really rocked their organization or exceeded expectations, right? Next. So just to give a quick summation of things, 3 things. building skill and agility, building resilience, and being proactive with automation here. So it's important to have an automation first mindset, because if it comes in as an afterthought, it's typically not going to work, because you will not find the right processes from that mindset to automate. Having an automation first means thinking that before I start my task, which part of my task, which part of my process, which part of my scope can I automate so that I create the time back to give to myself to do something that will bring a lot more value to the organization. Next. So just to give an example, one of our good customers is Konica Minolta in Japan. So recently they have used our solution to minimize delays on customers' orders. So starting somewhere in March, which is the typical, busy time for KM, Japan, they obviously in high precision manufacturing, they have parts for multifunction devices. They couldn't arrive on time from various locations. So what they did is that they implemented RPA to automate the process of extracting the order data from the system, and it matched this with the inventory adjustment list. Now, RPA is not the only solution that they implemented to solve the whole supply chain problem. It needs to be a combination of different solutions functioning in the right parts to solve the problem itself. But outcome for this is that they had built a system in approximately 10 days, which is amazing, where a bot basically it automatically submits the order to be handled without having a manual eyeball check every single time. The results as such is that there's an 85% decrease in the processing time. There's a lot of hours saved, 2,460, and lots of mistakes that could be made during this time because of the big rush was not being made, right? So with that, I would like to end off the presentation. Let's go to the last one, right? The key takeaways is that there's a difference between just in time and just in case. Just in case is a good to have, but just in time is you have to balance your budget, your priorities with what you need here first. And automation is at the forefront of the supply chain's digital future, because I believe that it is the building block of any digital enterprise. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Serene. That was a very nice overview of your presentation. One question before I invite Professor Richard Wilding to come in. Now, there are different views on what you judge as a customer experience. Some people like what they see and some people hate what they see. Where is the difference between a successful implementation versus something that is a poor, shoddy type of approach? Because, for example, in the customer experience, you need to have fast response, some interaction, and if the RPA doesn't work, what's the fallback position? How do you approach this with your customers in terms of design the architecture of a typical application?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Thank you for that. So one of the first things at Automation Anywhere, what we do is we have a process discovery workshop. Okay. So we don't go in and be the know-it-all for every industry, because obviously we are not. You are the experts in your subject matter domain, and we are not. But we are here to listen and to understand, in the whole process flow, which is the specific areas where we can apply automation to it. And by the way, when I said the part about you shouldn't automate certain things, that's really important, because there are some key criteria such as, is this a happy path? Is this a stable process? Is this used by, as a standard across many people, across geographies? Will this bring you the ROI? If you continue to do this, what are the percentage of errors that's made that now that you can eliminate from that? So these are some of the considerations that we take into play before we recommend the kind of processes that can and should be automated. And at the same time, when, always the challenge I see is that when a customer gets a bit excited and they get ahead a bit of themselves and want to save the world, and now they want to change the whole thing. Now that doesn't really quite work for RPA. At the risk of sounding a little bit controversial, let me just say something. Some people see RPA as a solution where after they lean the processes, after they implement ERP, CRM, a big solution, and this is the tail end of that thing to optimize whatever that's left of that. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that you can use it as a band-aid to save you time while freeing up your people to look into getting a more, permanent kind of solution. So there's many ways that you can use this. It's up to you really to determine your outcome.
Okay. That's great. Thank you, Serene. Richard, if I can bring you into this discussion now, obviously you've seen the way Automation Anywhere have approached the model. Clearly, there are different models that we can apply and different approaches. Give us your views about what's happening in the rest of the world. Is this a typical model that we see anywhere else? And are there some additional features that maybe we could benefit as users to enhance our customer experience?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about RPA, Robot Process Automation, I think one of the really important things you need to think about is that actually what you're trying to do here is to take the robot out of the human, right? Now, what do I mean by that? What's actually going on is RPA is really good at actually dealing with things which are, to be quite honest, repetitive, rules-based, documented processes. Now, we all have those. You know, there are certain things which I get up every morning, you know, for example, just launching Zoom, I have to go through a whole process of little clicks and this, that, and the other and everything else. Now, I suppose I could be really clever and I could have a tiny little RPA bot which says, as soon as I turn my computer on and I start talking, right, it does all those things which launches Zoom to a particular situation. You could do that if you wanted to. And so when you start thinking about RPA and where it's being applied, it is very much a foundational thing you can have in place. So in its very simplest terms, it could be that, you know, I remember, you know, one of the supply chain jobs which actually my son had was he would turn up at what it was actually, you know, really big company in the UK, supplying snack foods. They're global. You can probably guess who it was. But what would happen is the orders would come from a big supermarket in a big spreadsheet. And then what he had to do every morning was take those orders and put them into another spreadsheet, okay, so that then their systems could use it. Now, the point was he sat there as a sort of a graduate and he just went, hang on a minute, I could write a small macro which joins these two elements together and converts all the data. In fact, that worked out that it was going to save some ridiculous number of man days a year by doing that. Now, did that mean that people lost their work or anything else? No, it meant they could get involved in those value-adding activities. And I think this is really important because, you know, we talk RPA is very much a foundation. It leads up to artificial intelligence. And we talk about AI, but actually it would be better to use the terminology augmented intelligence, going back to what Serene was saying, because really what you're trying to do is to use these, if you like, this digital workforce to support people in the business to be actually get onto the value adding type activities. Right. Could be to pay more attention to, for example, you know, your customers and serve your customers more effectively. But, you know, if you're in a warehousing role or a supply chain role where you're just trying to process data, do forecasts and everything else, why not get the easy stuff automated? Final point on this. One of the principles that we're talking about now is something called the bimodal supply chain, bimodals. Mode one is a focus on predictability, okay? So this is the stuff which is the lean stuff in the business, as it were. Mode two is all about exploration and agility. And what we found through the pandemic is that a lot of the standard mode one operations in supply chains, which was traditionally been, you know, a heavy focus, has now flipped and people are having to think about the mode two. And in mode two, you very much need to have as much, if you like, intellectual capacity to be able to deal with, if you like, the volatility, the challenges and everything else. So RPA can release time from, you know, from your workforce so you can use that skill set which people have and robots do not have. So once again, think about it. What we're trying to do is to take the robot out of the human, okay, and enable the human to do what they're really, really good at.
That's a very good way of putting it, Richard, and it's very, very clear and very nice analogy. But let me put you a practical question. Earlier on this week, I was having a meeting with a couple of small forwarding agents here in Singapore, and they were talking about the cost of doing business, and the cost structure is now becoming a problem. And they're even worried about whether they'll survive the crisis and even to survive once the recovery comes through. So taking a practical example, could a forwarding agent imagine that the production of the airway bills or bills of lading could be a suitable application for an RPA project? Is that something that would really save the cost structure, take out the robot from the human? Richard, what your view first?
Yeah. If it's a repetitive task, I mean, what you've got to think about is it needs to be repetitive. It needs to be, it basically needs to be rules-based. Right. So if that person is basically doing the same job over and over again and applying the same rules over and over again, the other big thing, which is really important, is it needs to be documented. Okay. Right. Now, the problem is that some of these things, people have not actually got transparency of the actual process. So you need to understand the business process, and you need to have transparency of what that process is before you can then start saying, hang on a minute, I can now apply RPA, because you can't apply RPA to something which you don't know. So Serene and her team, I'm sure, spend an awful lot of time making sure they have clarity about what the process is before they sort of start implementing these particular approaches, because that's actually a really important element of this. And, you know, the key thing then is, you know, and we've talked about it, is systems integration. So, you know, at the end of the day, you know, whether it's 2 spreadsheets or 2 information systems, you know, if we've got these repetitive, documented, rules-based tasks, we can start actually using these things. So if I'm thinking about that role, if you're finding you've got a team of people doing exactly the same thing over and over and over and over again, as I said, take the robot out of that and, you know, allow the human to do the value-added stuff, which might be building the relationships with various people so that it's more likely that you're able to move things through. It's also just worth mentioning, we often talk in RPA about attended and unattended, okay? Now, what do I mean by that? Unattended is that you just have this little bot doing its thing, and it just does its thing, and nobody has any intervention on it. All right. So in other words, you know, it's just sitting there. We have these on our iPhones and everything. You know, you could say we've got RPA on our iPhones. There are certain things which just take place. I don't have any intervention on it, but it provides me with some information. It's a rules-based thing which is coming along. But also what you have is attended, and this is where the people can look at it. So they might basically say, ah, right, if this happens, I need to get this particular bot to do this particular job. If something else happens, I need to do this particular thing. So you've got attended and unattended, and you have to remember that, you know, at the end of the day, the human can be in control within this environment. So, you know, it depends how you want to play it. It might mean that you can have a situation where it is completely unattended, but then at other situations, it needs to be attended. And then, you know, the human can use their skills, as it were. The person, the worker, can use their skills to make all this work.
Interesting comments, Richard. Serene, can I bring you in on this point? First of all, I'd like you to maybe comment about how you approach attended and unattended methodologies in your application, but also we could come back to my previous comment about, give us some examples of how you've applied RPA in a logistics environment, either generating certain documentation, in terms of maybe planning, or using a typical example that Richard brought about a spreadsheet where you're adding maybe planning data or traffic data, so that the audience or basically understanding how we can apply this and the tangibles that could come out of your models.
Okay, thank you. Maybe let me just answer the portion about attended and unattended first. Now, when we first, because RPA, I think it is not a very old it is actually a nascent technology, even though the underlying technologies and everything is a lot of things built up together. But how I see this is that when I first started, and I'm one of the first employees here in ASEAN, people tend to start thinking unattended bots are back office functions, pure and simple. Front office functions is attended bots. And to me, that sort of put up an artificial barrier in terms of what, you're letting the technology dictate what you can or cannot do. I think the way that here at Automation, how we look at things is that we have this thing called human-bot collaboration. When you look at a whole process flow by itself, we slice it up and think that, okay, this portion is high volume, low value. A person is taking 5 minutes to do something that actually is sort of like a mental muscle memory, and you shouldn't be taking 5 minutes to do that because in between you have coffee breaks and all those things.
Right.
When you come back, you forgot something, you make a mistake. So those kind of things that when you point that out, those are the portions that if you need to have, like, for example, a two-factor authentication. So this is a use case. You do need to have somebody there to press a button to trigger the bot to go into a series of clicks and actions and all these kind of things. That's part of the mental muscle memory here. Now, the unattended bot could be very helpful in terms of, let's say, reportings, bulk reportings that need to take place, typically done by a person over like 3 hours, but it could be done in the middle of the night. So it's not really a hacker going to your systems to take something off your servers, but it's really an unattended bot being awoken. And then right in the morning at 6 a.m., you get the reports and the trackers and all these kind of things, the airway bills, the communications that typically would take somebody 3 hours in a working hour to come up with. So when you apply that to supply chain, to be honest, you can see many areas where you can apply that. So for example, in price lookup and comparison. So something as simple as cost reductions of source material is one way to effectively drive down the cost. But when you have somebody to manually conduct price lookups, right, then that's going to be a task that is actually high volume, low value. You've got somebody doing something that is basically essential mental muscle memory. So when you want to look for hundreds of products, that can prove quite a challenge very quickly. So RPA, what we use that is that one of our customers use our solution to routinely search for pricing data on very specific materials across different sites and structure this data in a way that makes it very easy for cross comparisons. Now, to take this one step further, you can even configure the bot to, send an email out if upon fulfilling certain parameterized optimizations of comparisons to the supplier to make an order or put in a query for that. Now, you can imagine that if it is a human doing this, all these things may take breaks in between, and you won't be able to achieve that level of productivity as if you would with RPA.
Sure. Thank you, Serene, for clarifying the attended and attentive versus the front end and back end approach. You're putting some smart application into that. Okay, so I need to correct something I said at the beginning. This is actually a press briefing, not a webinar per se. And I'd like to now actually pass it over to Ramon, because I think there's some pretty good questions that are coming in from some of the press people who are attending. So Ramon, do you have, can you take over?
Yes, Joe, I have a couple.
Thank you.
So this is a good one, and I'm sure it's top of mind for a lot of people. So should RPA be used as another tool by the IT department of an organization, or should it be a citizen's tool? I see you smiling at that question, Serene. Yeah. I'll let you answer that one first.
There's a textbook answer and there's a practitioner's answer to that. So
okay.
I think,
well, why don't you give us both?
Okay, the textbook answer is that, there's all these terms like democratized RPA, hyper RPA, and all these kind of things in the market. My opinion for that is that you really have to find the one that suits the maturity of your organization. Now, if you have, if you're obviously a big enterprise, you have a strong IT team. Now, IT is a conduit for many of these technologies. And to be honest, in many of my customers, when the stakeholders know what they want, but they don't know what's the first step to go to facilitate what they want, they turn to IT to do this. So IT becomes a really important stakeholder in the game, even though they are not the end user per se. Now, the good thing about intelligent automation from Automation Anywhere is that we, if you take a first glance at our solution, it is easy enough for the end users, the HRs, the procurements, and the folks that's really using the system, the process owners, to make some parameterized changes in the configuration. We are not expecting everybody to be a super Python or a programmer or this kind of things overnight. That's really not the aim of that. But citizen participation in RPA means that they are in control of the processes. If there's some certain dynamic triggers that they need to make, they can make that themselves within certain parameters without needing to take a queue number with IT department. But at the same time, for RPA, for intelligent automation to be a successful automation first tenet in any organizations, I always believe that IT or the innovation center there has to be a center of excellence built into the organizations, right? Because ultimately, it should not be a catch-up game. Center of excellence is a structure where you come in with a strong framework of best practices. You tell the different stakeholders, which are the citizen developers, I guess, in that sense, what are the kinds of processes that can or cannot be. And then you suddenly see this thought bubbles coming up in everybody's head. Oh, maybe I could do this. Oh, maybe I could do that. So center of excellence is the one that basically sieve out those activities to say, yes, you can, no, you can't, and these are the reasons why. It's fact-based, it's data-driven. And then ultimately from this whole pipeline of processes, you ultimately sieve out the best ones that can bring you the ROI. And that's how you grow. And it's ultimately, there's no one size fit all. That's what I'm trying to say here.
So let me rephrase that question, Serene. Who normally approaches AA, Automation Anywhere? Is it, say for example, I used to run the global commercial function for a multi-billion-dollar 3PL. And when we wanted to implement CRM, and we use Salesforce, and this is not a plug for Salesforce anyway, but it was a commercial team that actually went to engage with CRM providers. So in terms of RPA, who normally engages with AA first? Is it the IT department, or is it one of the users or the citizens, as the question asks?
Okay, across the board and with varying degrees of engagement. So for big organizations, where they have a demarcation between the innovation center and the IT team, sometimes we get a lot of good success with the innovation center, because I think that one of the things that they are chartered with is to innovate, find solutions for existing problems here. So to that sense, it's IT based. But at the same time, I get a lot of requests from chief HR officers, chief financial officers coming from the areas of productivities.
So I guess it depends very much on the function as well, right?
Yeah,
right.
Maturity, function, and size. Okay,
thanks. Yeah. Here's another question. This is one from Lloyd's loading list, yeah? And this is addressed to both yourself and Richard. And I think Joe also asked this question earlier. If you're talking to the SME forwarder or smaller logistics company, what's low-hanging fruit for them in terms of productivity gains from RPA? Joe mentioned airway bills. Is it documentation, or is it something else? Richard, what do you think?
Well, I mean, of course, it'll be very much specific, but one of the key things I think on implementing and sort of moving forward with this is actually having the approach that what you need to be able to do is get everybody in the business actually thinking about the types of processes they're undertaking. So if you think about a small, medium enterprise, just having a sort of a workshop for, maybe half a day where people are just sort of thinking through what are those repetitive rules-based processes that we're actually undertaking, because that can help you enable to identify particular things which are going on within your organization, which you think you can start applying these sorts of technologies to. And in a way, as we were sort of saying, sometimes you go to the IT department. The big problem is you can often find in big businesses that things fall down the cracks. You go and say, oh, I've got this idea about RPA, applying it within the supply chain. So you go to the supply chain director and say, hey, supply chain director, I've got, this thing called RPA and I want to implement it. And they're likely to turn around very often and just say, oh, that's not my job, go and talk to IT. The problem is that IT aren't aware of what's actually going on in the organization.
Yeah.
So actually, this is something for everybody in the business. So if you're in a small, medium enterprise, what I'd recommend is think about those basic, those basic things you need to sort of think through. So ask yourself, right, have I got stuff which is rules-based? Have I got tasks which are actually repetitive in nature that I need to actually deal with? Have I got processes that are documented? And it might be, well, I've got these things, but I haven't got them documented. So the start project might be, let's just get these things documented. And the other thing is if we've got systems integration which needs to take place, because that could very much be, well, I've got these two things and they don't talk to each other, and I have to have somebody sitting there being a robot taking data from one and applying it to the other. Well, am I able to then go and get, say, IT or get support from another organization to join those two together so that we can start actually moving forward? So I think that this is something where it's a real opportunity for everybody. And during COVID, we have found that just take place. And I think this is important to reflect on. So a lot of the things that, I'm talking to companies who are saying, oh yeah, we were told by IT it would take 2 years to implement that particular thing, right? And now they've suddenly found out, oh, hang on a minute, it took 3 weeks. Because necessity is the mother of invention. And what you're suddenly finding is people are looking at some of these things and saying, right, we've got to be able to do this. And I'm, through this, just on, say, payroll processes, things like that, I'm talking to big companies, thousands and thousands of employees. And what they're finding is they're getting more or less a 20% improvement in the way people are working. And they're working remotely. They don't have to go into this big office. They've just had to think so differently about the processes and remove all that non-value adding. And I guess one reflection for me is if you think about in the past, we had all these lean methodologies where you'd get people working together, trying to identify waste and everything else. Well, in a way, these repetitive processes are waste. If we're having to do it the same time over and over again, that's a waste of resource within our businesses. So in a way, we can use, if you like, some of those lessons from just-in-time thinking, lean thinking, those basic principles and methodologies for improving businesses, which we were all so good at, sort of maybe 20, 30 years ago, and actually apply them now. But of course, we've got this whole new tool set that we can use. And, we've got that thing called the 7 wastes. Well, perhaps what we actually now need to actually add is another waste, which is, repetitive processes that...
I thought you were going to say people.
Yeah.
All right, Serene, thanks for that answer, Richard. Very insightful. Serene, could you give us a quick rundown? Low-hanging fruit for the SME forwarder or smaller logistics company.
Okay. The cheap and cheerful way to look at this is first in the finance department, right? And why I single that out is because I think in the many projects that we have done here, when we do the process discovery workshop, it's basically like seeing a doctor. You spend time like 3 hours with each department. You document, what are the processes they would like to automate, and then you lean in on the ones that you should. Typically, the one that comes out tops in terms of processes that can and would desire to be automated comes from finance, because approximately about 75% of processes in finance potentially can be automated because they are rule-based. Somebody has already taken a decision. It is already documented, maybe sometimes in people's head, but it is documented somewhere. And therefore, you don't really need to have a discretionary, execution beyond the parameters to execute. So I would say that actually for SMEs, they would find that finance is a great hunting ground for processes to start automating, especially in the areas of AR. Yeah,
Right.
Accounts receivable. You owe me money, you pay me money, and all these things, right?
All right. Richard talked a bit about this earlier, but are we seeing COVID-19 lockdowns accelerating RPA take up in any way?
Absolutely. I think that, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, there are I mean, the numbers have jumped from 31 to I think 39% and all these things here. And the reason for that is that COVID just brings to light a lot of the weaknesses in the system. When people can't come together, they can't go to office to access certain systems that's sitting behind firewalls and everything. It just brings to light that there are a lot of the facts that, Richard talked about earlier that can actually be repeatedly done as a muscle memory by something rather than someone here.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks. I've got a question here from CILT Singapore, Edward Lau. Edward.
Thank you, Raymond and panelists. This question is seeking some advice from you. In today's RPA, we observe there are already built-in rule-based, deep learning, self-ratification, attended, unattended processes set in place. So these are both good and bad, leading to any problem could be magnified multiple times before any action could be taken or intervention. And let's even park aside any of those intentional malicious acts. So what experience could you please advise, or you have advised your client to rectify or preventing this from happening ongoingly? Because we all know that when someone put a rule in place, some smart people will try to do things maybe a step faster or the other way. So I'd like to hear your advice. Thank you.
Okay, hi Edward. That's a very good question. And to be honest, I think that is something that everyone is grappling with right now. Sometimes technologies move a little bit faster and gets adopted with all the fancy promises before an enterprise is ready to embrace. I think one of the things that needs to take place alongside, and that's something that we always advise our customers to do, is the culture of change management alongside, right? So when you talk about the self-learning, self-healing, self-discovery, aspects of intelligent automation, it sounds super cool, but you really need to break it down into the step-by-step thinking about where do you apply RPA. It's okay, perfectly fine to have a process that you apply RPA to certain tasks in the process, because one scope has many different processes. One process has many tasks. One task has many subtasks. You don't need to apply the whole new, the whole technology across board like a blanket. You really have to know the process, discuss with your systems integrators or your vendor that, this is a happy path, and based on the rules I mentioned a bit earlier, we can send the slides to you, right? That this is the right process to automate. You can't go far wrong with that. But at the same time, the change management portion, I think that at the right maturity, an organization should always always start looking to build up a center of excellence. Because again, like the name says itself, it's a center of excellence. It's not meant to be a board of developers, but it is a framework where you build up, where you look at automation as an integral part of your whole digitization path and journey itself.
All right.
Right.
Thanks, Serene. Richard.
Can I come into this point, Serene? I think you talk about the center of excellence, and you talk about an approach which is very structured. If I look at the market, and there's probably 80% of the market is made up of SMEs, people who don't have excellence centers, have a man and a dog operation for an IT, and yet they're having to grapple with the rising cost of automation, and make a radical change in their thinking. And entrepreneurs in the SME business are probably the most agile and the most fast thinking compared to MNCs, because they have this life and death. Now, I come to the question of cost. You talked about your ROI earlier on and said, look, we talk about ROI, but can you maybe explain to us how you address small companies in terms of convincing them that, look, this type of application is not a heavy asset engagement. It could be, it's a cloud-based system, it's pay as you go, and there is some efficiency in taking that first crucial step and make the difference in their business overall. I'll ask you this question. I'd like to also see Richard's view on how this is being addressed in Europe and other parts of the world. So I know more about Asia, and we can talk about Asia, but Richard, you need to come in and help us understand what's happening on the other side of the world as well.
Okay, thank you. So I think that the truth of the matter is that if you automate, if you spend all that money on the licensing and on the professional services for the first time to automate one process, don't think you're going to get a lot of ROI from this if this is a simple straight through processing, right?
Right.
And also at the same, but then again, it's not just about the hours saved. If that turns out to be a rock, but what we call it is a blockbuster process itself. Now, if this is something like an anti-money laundering process, and then one simple mistakes like what I read recently on the papers could cost the bank or the, in any other organization some big amount of money. I think having that, that fixture, that system in place to stop human errors is really important. You will see the ROI from that. For SMEs, I guess the challenge here is that I don't want to be paying a whole lot of money for a big system. And I'm only going to realize this like maybe 5 years down the road when the situation has completely changed and everything. Now, one of the things that you will see from RPA is that in the slides I've shown earlier, most RPA projects, when well defined and well executed, most customers will see the ROI in 4 to 6 months' time. And that happens when you have the bot running in parallel with the human. And now the human, after the pilot phase, stops doing the task. And then you see the hours freed up, the full-time employee, the FTE hours freed up, and the bot continues running. And that's the true ROI that's being showed by the bots itself.
Okay.
Now,
so it comes back to basics, right? It comes back to what you were saying earlier on, the process, discovery, workshop. You describe it, and Richard described it as the transparency of the process, understanding the nuts and bolts. So that's the starting point, isn't
Correct.
it, the SME? That is, if they get that right, then they get an ROI, which is going to be beneficial. Get that wrong, it's a mess.
Absolutely.
Right? That's it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Richard, what's your view? What's happening in Europe on this side of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that this is really important. I'm just going to go back to something which Edward was saying, because in Edward's question, he was talking about deep learning and things like that. We have to remember that RPA isn't about that. So RPA is very much a foundational thing. It's basically looking at structured rules-based issues. What you then go up to is a level where you start self-solving, okay? So this is where we're moving up, if you like, a hierarchy towards AI. You then move into sort of analyzing and thinking type activities, which are done by bots. And then finally, you get into a predictive and advisory world. What we've got to remember is that RPA is, if you like, the foundation stone that you can then start building these things on. So I think it's important to just define that, because when you're actually thinking about, where things are going in, say, Europe and things like that, it can be, yes, you might have, for some of your more complex processes, you might want to use cloud-based solutions and everything else. But as I said, some of the things that you can basically do, you can do on your laptop, right? If you have the right people there, it's a matter of starting small, piloting to prove the principles, getting people, if you like, with an RPA mindset. And you can start off on some really simple, nice, simple processes and then start building it up. And I think one of the challenges is that people they hear about these wonderful technologies and then they dive in at a very, very high level. And it's a bit like me, deciding, right, I'm going to, I need to do some, filming for lectures, and going and trying to build spend £20,000 on a film studio in my, for my back bedroom or something. It's at that stage, it's not worth, it's not worth it. Just spend a few pounds, start small, get the principles in place, pilot to prove, and then you're able to sort of build up these things and start actually moving through. And then once you've got RPA in place and you start thinking about that, then you can start saying, well, okay, do I want to take it to the next level? And the next level, and so on and so forth. So I think that's really an important principle to think through. And I think the people who are being really pragmatic about its implementation over here is they're starting with that. It's understanding the core principles of what you're trying to achieve, and then just pilot to prove and keep building. I mean, a lot of these technologies, a lot of the things are well established now. So I often find in supply chain world, innovation comes from combining approaches from different areas within the business. And I think that that's important to sort of think through. It's, you know, you might say, oh, right, well, I can use a little bit of, I don't know, augmented reality and combine that with something else in a warehouse and have a bit of RPA in a warehouse. And then I'm able to actually build up a way of working. And we're finding a lot of that at the moment because the problem is often the IT people are about, well, 2 years ahead of where the managers and the cultures of the businesses are. So
you must have been working in different companies, but yeah.
But start small, pilot to prove, get the principles. As I said, use some of that, you know, those lean methodologies that you had years ago, but put a different slant on it, because that'll help you start thinking through and identifying these repetitive things that you can do, get them documented. Hey, guess what? There's whole methodology attached to, you know, process mapping and so on and so forth. Just get transparency of what's actually going on. You know, you don't have to make this complicated. I shouldn't say this, but I will. I have a crazy rule about supply chain data mapping and information. And I basically say, any supply chain data or information, you need to be able to easily explain it to your hairdresser in about 10 minutes. And why is that? Because if you can explain to a hairdresser and they understand, because they're working in a completely different world and mindset, you can then take that supply chain information and explain it to your procurement team, your manufacturing team, or whatever, because they may as well be hairdressers. So therefore, just, you know, keep things simple, transparent, get it documented. Don't come up with masses of process maps which go over pages and pages. That's not transparency. Just get it on one page that you can explain to somebody really easily where best possible. Yes, your IT team might have all those maps behind it, but to really create innovation within your business, that's what you need to do. Keep it simple and really communicate.
So that's the idiot's guide to proof of concept, Richard, eh?
Joe, last question. And I think actually it's also a good way perhaps to wrap up. We're almost approaching top of the hour. For both Serene and Richard, you know, we're talking about racing with the machine, but what's the mindset or the skill sets that employees should have to complement the RPA bots? Maybe let me rephrase that. How should we approach it as supply chain professionals? What frame of mind should we have?
I think what Richard said is really true. Start small. Don't be over ambitious. I think that if I cannot emphasize anything more, it's not something that you start off, first step, you want to save the world. You will solve every problem inherent in the system. You can't. Start small, find what works for you, and learn along the way. I think that it is really a learning journey, actually, both for, you know, for the implementers and the stakeholders and the IT and everybody involved in any projects for RPA. It really is that.
Yeah, and I mean, I just think it is. It really is, you know, it sounds great, doesn't it? You know, robot process automation, it sounds like rocket science, but actually a lot of it doesn't have to be rocket science. You know, it's actually a way of thinking, a way about identifying those key things that we're doing day in, day out, those repetitive processes, taking the robot out of, you know, out of the human and getting it to, you know, just make us so that we can actually use those creative skill sets. So, if, you know, one of the key things I'm finding in supply chain, we talk about the technical skill set, the IQ within the supply chain. But what you have to remember is that is just a qualifier for most supply chain managers and people working in supply chain. The real winner nowadays is the EQ. It's the emotional intelligence. It's the relational intelligence. It's all about how we build relationships. So if you're able to, if you like, take the robot out the human, so the human's able to spend more time actually working on relationships and things like that, then that is going to be absolutely critical. And so that skill set, I think we need to realize is that, you know, I would say if you're going to go about this well, think about, you know, some of those, you know, methodologies for continuous improvement and so on and so forth. Understand what RPA is all about. So that repetition, you know, documented processes, you've got a whole raft of stuff there, which is well documented. It's been documented for over 30, 40 years. You can apply those at quite a nice level. And then the key thing is as that starts getting implemented, that's going to release your resource to do what humans can really do well. And that's all about building relationships across the supply chain to actually create value. I often say that supply chain management is about the management of relationships with all the stakeholders so you can increase value for the final customer and also reduce cost across the supply chain as a whole. And I think that's really what we're trying to achieve.
Those are great takeaways, Serene and Richard. Really, really great to understand where we've come from and where we're going. The mindset, as Serene says, start small. Can't solve all the problems in one shot. Richard, yes, we need to identify the key processes, but most importantly, EQ now is about building relationships, applying traditional methods, and really leveraging on the network of your stakeholders in the game, basically. Serene, Richard, we don't have enough time to take it any further. The discussion's been excellent. The presentation material has been very enlightening. Thank you very much for your insights. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for sharing with us and the press and the media who've asked us some very interesting questions. I hope that this has been an appetizer to RPA. There's a lot more that we can look at, but the key messages have been shared with all of us. Again, thank you very much, Serene and Richard. Thank you to the media and the press. To everybody, take care, stay well, and let's hope this COVID crisis continues to enlighten us and innovate our future as we go forward. Take care and all the very best.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you.
Much.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Bye-bye.